The Tudor dynasty is infamous for producing King Henry VIII, but their dark history is much more complicated and fascinating. The Tudor dynasty produced some of the most infamous monarchs in English history, from Henry VIII to Bloody Mary to Elizabeth I, but it all began with the union of Edmund Tudor and Lady Margaret Beaufort, which took place during one of England's most violent periods, the Wars of the Roses, a brutal civil war between the houses of Lancaster and York. Tragically, just a year after their wedding, Edmund Tudor died in captivity after being captured by Yorkist forces. Margaret, only 13 years old and heavily pregnant, was left a widow. She would give birth to their son, the future King Henry VII. When King Henry VI died in 1471, young Henry Tudor, just 14 years old, became the leading Lancastrian heir. This made him a major target in Yorkist-controlled England. To protect him, Margaret arranged for Henry to flee to France. It would be 12 long years before mother and son saw each other again. In August 1485, Henry returned to England and defeated Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth, claiming the throne and officially starting the Tudor dynasty by becoming King Henry VII. Soon after taking the throne, Henry VII locked up Edward, Earl of Warwick. Edward was just 10 years old, but he had royal blood. He was the nephew of Richard III and had a stronger claim to the throne than Henry himself. That made him dangerous. Henry threw the boy into the Tower of London, where he stayed for 14 long years. When Edward was finally executed, many believed Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain were to blame. They planned to send their daughter Catherine of Aragon to England to marry Prince Arthur. But as long as Edward lived, the Tudor dynasty wasn't secure, so Henry made a brutal choice. The boy had to die to make a way for the alliance with Spain. Catherine and Arthur's wedding included the only public royal bedding ceremony in 16th century England. Ironically, what happened after that moment, the question of whether their marriage was ever consummated, would become one of the most important legal debates of the century. In 1502, Prince Arthur died suddenly, just months after marrying Catherine. The following year, Henry's wife Elizabeth of York died in childbirth. Overcome with grief, the king isolated himself, refusing to speak to anyone but his mother, Margaret Beaufort. After the death of his son, Prince Arthur, King Henry worked to salvage the Spanish alliance. He received a papal dispensation that allowed his Spanish daughter-in-law, Catherine of Aragon, to marry his surviving son, the future Henry VIII. Why did Henry VII do this? Likely it was to keep Catherine's huge dowry in the family. Speaking of keeping things in the family, Henry VII was so determined to keep Catherine of Aragon's dowry that he even considered marrying his son's widow himself. But in the end, Catherine of Aragon married Henry VIII, and the alliance between Spain and England was strong, for now. Henry VII died on April 21, 1509. His mother, Margaret Beaufort, outlived her son. She managed to witness the marriage of her grandson, Henry VIII, to Catherine of Aragon and the couple's joint coronation. She died just 2 months after her beloved son. Henry VIII was consumed by his desire to father a son, something that proved famously difficult for him. Catherine of Aragon bore Henry 6 children, including 2 sons, but all but one, the future Queen Mary, died in infancy. Despite their later drama over heirs, Henry and Catherine of Aragon were a medieval power couple, at least at first. When Henry headed off to fight a war in France, he left Catherine in charge as regent. In 1513, the Scottish army, led by King James IV, decided to invade England while the king was away. But England still had a queen. A heavily pregnant Catherine donned full armor and rallied the troops herself before the Battle of Flodden. The result? A crushing English victory and the death of James IV. Catherine even sent Henry a piece of his rival's bloodied coat to use as a war banner, a legendary move. Unfortunately, this victory did not take Henry's mind off his main predicament, securing that heir. In 1516, Queen Catherine of Aragon gave birth to Henry VIII's first legitimate, healthy child, Princess Mary. But even the birth of a healthy daughter could not save Catherine from what was coming. Henry VIII became obsessed with a passage from Leviticus that states a man who marries his brother's wife will be childless. And sadly, in his eyes, Princess Mary just didn't count. Desperate, Henry began looking for a way out of the marriage. He petitioned the Pope for an annulment, but was refused. So much blood would be spilled because of that refusal. There was another reason Henry wanted to annul his marriage. He was pursuing Lady Anne Boleyn, who refused to become his mistress. She wanted to be queen. Their relationship was controversial, and not just because Henry was already married. The king had also had an affair with Anne's older sister, Mary, but that didn't seem to bother the king or Anne too much. In the end, Henry decided that he didn't need the Pope's permission. He established the Church of England, declared that he was head of the church, and kicked off a little thing called the English Reformation. In 1533, the new Archbishop of Canterbury presided over the trial that declared Henry's first marriage annulled and his secret marriage to Anne Boleyn valid. At the time, Anne Boleyn was already pregnant. Henry's treatment of Catherine of Aragon after the divorce caused a major rift between Henry and his daughter Mary. Catherine of Aragon was banished from court and stripped of her title. She spent her final days fasting and praying at Kimbolton Castle. She continued to refer to herself as the Queen of England until her death. Catherine and Henry were married for 24 years. Their marriage lasted longer than all of Henry's other marriages combined. The cause of her death baffled her doctors. Her body seemed perfectly healthy, except for one chilling detail. Her heart had turned black. Whispers spread quickly. Some swore she'd been poisoned. Others believed she died of a broken heart. Today, most historians think it was a rare form of heart cancer. Whatever the truth, it was a haunting and oddly poetic end to her tragic tale. Anne Boleyn showed no lack of disdain for her predecessor. She refused to attend Catherine's funeral, prevented Catherine's daughter Mary from attending, and spent the day parading around the castle in bright yellow. But her time as queen would be much shorter than Catherine's. Henry and Anne were certain Anne was carrying a male heir, so they must have been very disappointed when the queen gave birth to another daughter, Elizabeth. Despite everything he went through to be with Anne, Henry was basically in the same situation he was in before. The volatile king was less than pleased. Soon, it was Anne's turn to see her husband's dark side. No fewer than 7 men were accused of carrying out affairs with Anne Boleyn, among them Anne's own brother, George. Modern historians agree that the charges brought against Anne Boleyn were false and unconvincing. Henry likely had her killed because she could not give him the male heir he so desperately wanted. Anne was sentenced to death and was beheaded on May 19, 1536. Henry VIII's next wife, Jane Seymour, was not only Anne Boleyn's lady-in-waiting, but she was also Anne's second cousin. The two women had been close friends at Henry's court until Anne noticed Jane wearing a necklace. The necklace featured a small portrait of Jane's new lover, Henry VIII. Henry was not a man to waste time. Within 24 hours of Anne Boleyn's execution, he was already engaged to Jane Seymour. Seymour eventually gave him his long-desired son, Edward VI. Unfortunately, Jane's labor was long and difficult. At one point, when an attendant asked Henry whether they should try to save the mother or the baby if it came to that, he allegedly said, "If you cannot save both, at least let the child live, for other wives are easily found." Brutal. Jane Seymour died 2 weeks after giving birth to Edward. She was the only one of Henry's 6 wives to be buried with him, and he later called her his one true wife. After the death of Jane Seymour, Henry VIII began to search for his next wife. Portraits of potential brides were sent to him to help him choose. He picked Anne of Cleves based on a painting of her, but when he met her in person, he did not like what he saw. However, there may be more to the story. On her way to meet the king, Anne of Cleves stopped at Rochester. Suddenly, a big, scruffy man barged into the room. The man may have tried to flirt with her and was ignored, or others claim he got handsy and scared Anne. Unfortunately, the burly man was actually Henry VIII in disguise. Henry was hoping for a secret, romantic moment, but when Anne didn't recognize him, Henry was insulted, and from then on, he likely decided he didn't want to be with her anyway. Later, Henry famously called Anne a fat Flanders mare and had their marriage annulled after just 6 months. On the bright side, Anne of Cleves got to keep her head. Only 16 days after the annulment, 49-year-old Henry married 19-year-old Catherine Howard. Less than a year into the marriage, rumors began to swirl about the Queen's infidelity. Henry was reluctant to believe the rumors at first, but eventually he had to concede and had her executed in 1542. According to legend, when Catherine was arrested, she broke free from her guards and ran down the hallway screaming for Henry to show her mercy. She never reached him, and she never saw him again. That hallway is now known as the Haunted Gallery. To this day, people say Catherine's ghostly screams can be heard echoing through the hallway. Henry VIII's 6th and final wife, Catherine Parr, managed to not only hold on to her head, she actually outlived her tyrannical husband. Catherine Parr also played a key role in restoring Mary and Elizabeth to the line of succession, after Henry had made them illegitimate by annulling his marriages to their mothers. Famous for his vigor and athleticism in his youth, Henry's final years were another story. The king gained a massive amount of weight and was in very poor health at the end of his life. He died in 1547 at the age of 55. The next Tudor to sit on the throne would be Edward VI. Edward VI became king when he was just 9 years old. Today he is often portrayed as sickly and weak, but those who knew him described him as tall and said he grew quickly. He'd had a bad fever at 4, but his personal journals reveal no serious illness until the final months of his life. Edward's reign would be short. By early 1553, Edward was in bad shape. He couldn't walk, his legs were swollen, he spent most days lying down. Everyone knew he wouldn't live long, and he hadn't produced an heir. Since Henry VIII had put Edward's half-sisters, Mary and Elizabeth, back in the line of succession, the next in line was his Catholic half-sister, Mary. That didn't sit well with Edward or his Protestant advisors. So, on his deathbed, Edward changed the plan. He cut both sisters out and passed the crown to his cousin, Lady Jane Grey, a Protestant. But his plan didn't work. Jane Grey was only queen for 9 days before Mary took the throne by force. Edward's Protestant kingdom was over. His Catholic sister was queen, and Jane Grey became a footnote in history known as the 9 Days Queen. Mary was a busy queen. As she attempted to reverse the Protestant reforms started by her father, Mary had over 280 dissenters of the Catholic Church burned at the stake in what was known as the Marian persecutions, hence her nickname, Bloody Mary. In comparison, Henry VIII burned 81 people, while Elizabeth I only doled out that particular punishment on 5 occasions. Clearly, Mary I was rather zealous when it came to persecuting Protestants in England. However, she was hardly more bloody than her father. Henry executed somewhere between 57,000 and 72,000 people during his reign, and of course ordered the execution of not one, but 2 of his very own wives. But he was never called Bloody Henry. In the summer of 1554, Queen Mary believed she was pregnant with her first child. The court buzzed with preparations for the arrival of a new Tudor heir. And behind the scenes, Mary's husband Philip was allegedly making backup plans to marry her half-sister Elizabeth if things went sideways and Mary died in childbirth. There was just one problem. Mary wasn't actually pregnant. She was experiencing a rare condition known as a false pregnancy, where a woman shows all the signs of being pregnant, but there is no baby. Across England, stories sprung up to explain the unusual events of Mary's pregnancy. Some claimed she kept a miscarriage secret, or that the pregnancy was always fake and that Mary was going to smuggle in a baby to pose as her own. Others suggested that Mary was actually ill and trying to cover up her symptoms. Whatever the truth, Mary still did not have an heir and was not happy about who was next in line. Mary never much liked her half-sister Elizabeth, which made sense considering Elizabeth's mother was Anne Boleyn. She imprisoned her half-sister and even considered executing her. Luckily, cooler heads prevailed, and eventually Mary accepted Elizabeth as the heir to the throne. Likely because her husband Philip convinced her it was the right decision, and Mary, head over heels in love with Philip, reluctantly followed his advice. Mary Tudor died childless in 1558, at just 42 years old. With her gone, her widower Philip quickly revealed his true intentions. He now turned his sights on Elizabeth, just as he had hinted during Mary's supposed pregnancy. Most likely, Philip hoped to preserve a powerful Catholic alliance with England, but Elizabeth wasn't interested, and she made that perfectly clear by rejecting his proposal. Elizabeth had had a very hard childhood. She was mistreated, considered illegitimate, and likely abused while living as a ward with Catherine Parr, Henry VIII's widow. Parr's husband, Thomas Seymour, was said to have had an inappropriate relationship with the young princess. Despite her long reign and eligibility, Elizabeth I never married. She entertained many suitors, including foreign royals and high-ranking Englishmen, but to her counsel's despair, she never married. According to her, she was married to England, and this wise move was probably what kept her in power for so long. Throughout her reign, one of her main enemies was her first cousin once removed, Mary, Queen of Scots. Elizabeth I imprisoned Mary when her actions turned against the English throne. Mary was in prison for 18 years before she was finally executed. Historically, there is some disagreement on whether Elizabeth officially sanctioned the execution. It was carried out quickly, and Elizabeth had been reluctant to sign and dispatch the warrant. During their long and tumultuous relationship, Elizabeth I and Mary, Queen of Scots, never actually met in person. In the 19th century, a rumor was started that Elizabeth I died as a child and was replaced with a red-headed boy of the same age by the governess in charge of raising her. Today, most historians agree that the old theory was simply a reflection of the time, an attempt by 19th century scholars to explain why Elizabeth I never married or had children, yet still became one of England's most celebrated monarchs. And in the greatest twist of all, after all of Henry VIII's desperate efforts to secure a male heir, it was his daughter, Elizabeth, who ruled England with unmatched strength and vision. But when she died in 1603 without an heir, The Tudor Dynasty, which had begun in 1485 with Henry VII, came to an end. The crown passed to Elizabeth I's cousin, James Stuart, who became James I of England, and a new chapter in England's royal saga began. Thanks for watching History Exposé. If you love uncovering the best stories in history, hit like and subscribe to keep exploring with us. Don't forget to visit our main page, Factinate, for more incredible facts about everything.